People of the internet, or as I am wont to call y'all, internetians. I am Spencer, and welcome to my Edge of View. A few days ago, Mr. Repzion posted a video on capital punishment. Since the families of the victims in the recent Colorado shooting are now in the process of deciding whether to pursue the capital punishment against James Holmes, I feel now's a good time to put my 2 cents in while we as a nation think about the ramifications of the punishment with a very clear example and a very clear victim in mind. I'm positive that very few people would consider Holmes any sort of victim, though, so right out of the bag, I'm sure you have some idea at least where I'm going with this. But hear me out, and if after you hear my argument you still disagree, I wholeheartedly invite you to post your responses, as I'd appreciate any discussion you'd like to offer. For those who don't know, capital punishment is a sterile and convenient euphemism for killing somebody who did something awful, or as the bourgeoisie would say, the death penalty. Usually prosecutors seek it with input from the victims' families in response to particularly heinous murders, such as the ones allegedly committed by Holmes. As of the writing of the script outline for the video, prosecutors are in the process of determining if they will bother to seek out the death penalty, and nothing is set in stone yet. For those who have been living under a rock in the abyss of the ocean in a dead anglerfish's gullet, Holmes is accused of, and has not yet attempted to deny, killing 12 people and injuring 50-some others at a Dark Knight Rises premiere in Aurora, Colorado a few days ago. Colorado being one of the states still supporting the death penalty, the media, namely CNN, Fox News, and to a far lesser extent the BBC, started to write about the possibility of the death penalty for Holmes's crimes. I'm largely coming at this issue academically. I've never had a family member killed, and because of that, there's a bit of emotional lapse between me and the reality of having a loved one killed and the killer up for punishment. Because of this disconnect, I don't know what I'd personally do in a situation like the one in Colorado, though I respect either choice taken by the families and prosecutors. After all, killing Holmes would have a few positives. For one, the punishment would directly fit the crime, albeit in a very eye-for-an-eye way that Christians, Jesus, or any sane person would squirm at. The death of Holmes might offer a sense of closure for the families of the victims, which could be a legitimate benefit of this option. And since the prison system, and the parole system in particular, is just a little bit of a joke, it's possible that eventually Holmes would be out in public again to do whatever he does, be that killing people or giving presentations on microRNA biomarkers or whatever. Now, if I had a family member or loved one in the shooting, in theory, and only in theory, I would like to think I'd prefer to see Holmes rot in jail for the rest of his life. To me, that seems like a far worse punishment than death. Death is quick and relatively painless. It could even be viewed as a release for someone with as much apparent mental baggage as Holmes or any similar caliber murderer. Life is long and hard and painful and thoughtful, and every day you go over the mistakes you've made. And that's before you kill 12 people and get thrown in prison forever. And I know what you might be thinking, why the hell would we pay our tax money to keep that bastard fed and clothed and housed for the rest of his life? Well, you would do it because killing him would actually cost you more. That's right, factor in the court costs, the briefs, the appeals, all the people involved in the cost of the actual punishment, and a bunch of other costly factors, and the death penalty is actually more expensive than keeping that bastard fed and clothed and housed for the rest of his life. The reason for all this red tape is eloquently stated by Frank Zimring, who says that what we are paying for at such great cost is essentially our own ambivalence about capital punishment. We try to maintain the apparatus of state killing and another apparatus that almost guarantees that it won't happen. The public pays for both sides. Think about that. The very reason that we have to pay so much for someone to be put to death is because we as a nation with a judiciary system don't really want to kill anyone. The system itself is a freaking identity crisis every time we try to put someone to death. So, from my perspective, we've established that the more worthy punishment is actually cheaper than the less worthy one. Not to mention faster, easier to implement and convict, less prone to jury bias one way or the other. Let's think about jury bias for just a second. Let's say the ultimate punishment upon conviction is life imprisonment. A jury will be more likely to convict in this situation than a situation where their conviction would mean death. No one wants to be the one to flick the switch on the chair or deliver the drug from the needle, and taking the jury out of that position increases the chance for a fair jury verdict. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather see this guy locked away forever because justice worked than acquitted or given a weaker punishment because it failed. Let's step back from this particular case and look at how the world sees capital punishment. Most developed nations, including the European ones that we care so much about for their power and trade and politics, see the U.S. death penalty as a sort of vestigial barbarism left over far too long. It was the same way with slavery back when we had that. It was seen by other developed countries as something that should have died out a long time ago, but was kept alive thanks to our country's dangerous level of selfishness and childishness. Now, we all, or virtually all, see extended slavery as a national shame, a wrong that we committed and allowed to happen with little or no protest for hundreds of years. It's completely possible that in another century or so, the death penalty could be another of these national shames. There's also the matter of rehabilitation versus punishment. What's the goal of justice here? Is it to hurt the offender so that they can never do the crime again? Or is it to turn them around into productive members of society who can atone for their transgressions against decency and law? I know that I'd like to see a productive member of society out of the deal, if possible. I'd like to see every murderer walk out of prison and apologize to the family of the victim before going to their psychologist-aided, tax-paying, contribution-making lives. From a financial standpoint, a moral standpoint, a psychological standpoint, this makes way more sense than threats and punishment. Punishment doesn't change psychology. Purpose and reward change psychology. And changed psychologies can change people. So now that we've outlined the pros and cons of my thoughts on the subject, what's the endgame? What do we want to do as a society with Holmes and people like him? I have a few thoughts. You might agree with some, or all, or none. And here they are. Idea 1. We commit murderers to the benefit and whim of society. That is to say, we make them do a lifetime of community service, as long as they're able. I'm not talking back-breaking labor. I'm talking about 40 to 60 hours a week of various useful tasks given real job training. We could always use more public servants, road workers, electrical guys, phone line people. Many prisons already offer classes and the ability to get a degree in prison. This could become a part of the repayment of their debt to society. What better way to use someone who hurt society than by having them turn around and help it? It would also give them purpose and reason, changing psychology. Of course, not every prisoner would go along with this, and frankly, we'd lose nothing by simply allowing lifetime imprisonment. Like I said, imprisonment without purpose strikes me as a fate worse than death anyway, so justice is still being served, even if they aren't getting any psychological benefit out of it. I would also like to see the implementation of prison-based mental health programs like the ones in India that utilize Vipassana, or the ones in Japan that use Naikan. I've included a link to the first part of the 4-part video on Vipassana. It's a really interesting watch that doesn't really take too much of your time. These combination programs of group psychotherapy and imprisonment have been markedly successful where they're applied, and I'd like to see similar programs set up here as a rehabilitation tool and as a way to change psychologies for the long-term betterment of the prisoners and of the nation as a whole. That's today's talk. I hope you learned something useful. Agree with me? Disagree with me? Well, leave a comment and we can chat about it. Make sure to check out that Vipassana video and feel free to subscribe if you feel like listening to more politically relevant rants from yours truly. This was Spencer, and that was my Edge of View.